Immigration in the UK isn't going anywhere. But as far-right voters torch the asylum hotels and beat refugees in the streets of the UK, there's an urgent conversation to have. If mass immigration is the future of the UK, how do we integrate them into society, especially when, for the locals, the true British identity is under threat? In this video, we're taking a look at the recent anti-immigration riots in the UK, the inconsistent immigration policies, the vulnerability of British culture, and the need for multiculturalism. Tough choices. Those two words are often seen and heard in British political news. Many UK politicians have uttered these two words to redefine their electability. The notion is that politicians will take strict actions to foster the UK economy, even if it is at the expense of immigrants. There is little doubt that the UK voters are vouching for anti-immigration policies, but research and data show that the country desperately needs immigrants, entirely for its economy. The debate isn't just about the country welcoming more non-natives, it's also about whether the government is doing right by the immigrants who have already found a home in the country. The recent anti-immigrant riots in the UK tell us otherwise. In August 2024, riots continued to rage in the country. Hotels housing asylum seekers were targeted by far-right agitators. For instance, the Holiday Inn Express hotel in Tamworth in northern England was set on fire. The crowd gathered around the hotel was relentless. They were vocal about their objectives to dispel immigrants from the country. The rioting started in August 2024 in Southport, England. During a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga class, 3 young girls were stabbed. Unfortunately, the victims didn't make it. The stabber was a 17-year-old boy named Axel Rudakapana, who was born in Cardiff, Wales. However, his parents were said to be Christian and from Rwanda. After the attack, some reports online suggested that Axel was a Muslim immigrant. This alone was enough to incite the anti-immigrant voters in the UK. The response that followed was violent and brutal. The torching and rioting was part of the larger anti-Muslim fear in the country, which has been solidified by the Conservative support. Rosa Friedman, a professor at the University of Reading, spoke to Al Jazeera about the riots. She said they happened because the Conservative government supported far-right groups in the past. She added, "These groups aren't hiding anymore. We can't blame the Labour Party, which has been in power for 4 weeks." Within hours, the UK police had arrested more than 400 Britons. Their crimes ranged from physically harming the refugees or immigrants to spreading hate online. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the riots an organised illegal thuggery by only a portion of Britons. He further said, "I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, either directly or those whipping up the disorder online." His remarks weren't well received by the Conservative voters and politicians. Nigel Farage, the anti-immigration leader of the populist movement Reform UK, who is now a sitting MP, also stoked tensions. In May 2024, he gave several statements suggesting Muslims do not share British values, hence they don't belong in the UK. In the light of rioting, he said, "The far right are a reaction to fear, to discomfort, to unease that is out there shared by tens of millions of people." In the aftermath, the government took a strict measure against the rioters. The numerous arrests that followed were Exhibit A. However, at the same time, veteran Labour Party MPs took note of the lack of social cohesion in the country. For better or worse, refugees and immigrants have been part of the cultural fabric of the UK for centuries now. Why have the conditions worsened? Picture a very ideal UK. Immigration is all-time low and the Tories are celebrating historical win. Hotels like Holiday Inn Express are back to hosting white and native individuals, but at the same time the NHS is botched because of the lack of support staff. There aren't enough neurosurgeons around, the Indian takeout places are empty, most universities are failing to flaunt a diverse student community. Many anti-immigration voters don't want a future without doctors, servers, academics, tech wizards, students, and whatnot, but at the same time, they constantly want to vote immigration out of the country. To state the obvious, the immigration policy of the UK, either pro or against, has been incoherent, hollow from within. In 2023, the Tories were staunch in closing the gates to immigrants, but despite their sentiments, the statistics didn't work out in their favour. For the past 5 elections, the Conservative Party has pledged to cut net immigration. Yet net immigration hit 606,000 in Britain in 2022 when the Conservatives were in power. It was obvious that incoming immigrants had taken advantage of a more liberal post-Brexit immigration regime. For many think tanks, immigration has become an effective political weapon for the far right and the Conservatives. A glance of the UK Twitter would show several tweets implicating young immigrants for a series of crimes that existed in the country before their arrival. Experts cite that such considerations have immense political value. Immigration has risen a lot since the Brexit vote, but concerns about it have actually decreased over the past decade. In 2012, only a quarter of people believed that immigrants helped the British economy, while half thought they were harmful, according to the think tank British Future. Now those views have flipped, with more people seeing immigrants as a benefit. Fewer people now say that immigration is the biggest problem for the country. Instead, issues like poor healthcare and high inflation are what worries people the most. Nevertheless, immigration remains a decisive issue when it comes to casting a vote in general elections. Following the video so far, well, give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for a more easy breakdown of complex political issues in the UK. For Tories, it's very important to protect the British identity. The identity in question is arbitrary, of course, but an anti-immigration voter would easily describe it as white, native, and, well, brimming with English values. For many such voters, this visual of identity is under constant threat as the UK keeps taking immigrants from the subcontinent, Arab countries, and Africa. At large, when social media rhetoric paints these so-called outsiders as new to British values and sophistication, it becomes a problem. The other issue at hand is a gross overgeneralization. Do refugees and immigrants commit crimes? Well, yes, but so do the natives. But in the case of the former, a crime, no matter how severe, is often linked with the impending ruin of Britain and its civilized values. It's safe to assume that many Britons do not share these opinions, but they also talk about how their daily lives are being affected by a broken immigration policy. On the other hand, experts say that immigration policies aren't dysfunctional in isolation. Perhaps the biggest tipping point in this debate is the individuals who were previously anti-immigration. What changed their minds? The answer lies with other policy issues in the country. Take the NHS, for example. Whether to fund the healthcare program or not has been a policy debate between the political fronts for years. Tories want to pull money from the program. Limited and ineffective hiring has made waiting lists jarring and long. In such circumstances, it's easy to draw an influx of people in the country as the reason why the NHS is failing. However, reports and data show that immigration isn't hurting the NHS. In fact, the Migration Advisory Committee said that migrants from the European economy area give more to the health service and social care in terms of money and work than they used in services. The NHS is currently struggling with many job openings and can't find enough staff to meet demand. Health professional jobs have been on the shortage occupations list for a while. Although plans to increase training, create more ways to enter the profession, and encourage people to work for the NHS are good ideas for recruiting locally. These take time to work because it takes years to train healthcare workers. To help cover the more than 100,000 vacancies in the NHS, immigration and recruiting from abroad offer a large pool of workers. Some argue that reducing migration would lower demand for NHS services. However, this argument often overlooks the typical age group of migrants. Most people who move to the UK are in their 20s and 30s. They usually work for pay for education, meaning they contribute taxes that help fund public services. Since they are younger, they also tend to use NHS services less than older populations. We can draw a similar analysis for the housing crisis in Britain too. Reform UK has cited mass immigration as the biggest impetus behind the accommodation issues in the country. The Conservative Party's manifesto promised to create new laws introducing local connection and UK connection tests for social housing in England. These tests aim to make sure that social housing, which is a limited resource, is given out fairly. This idea was similar to a consultation started by the government in 2023 for a policy called British Homes for British Workers. These arguments are based on misunderstandings about how migration and housing are connected, often blaming migrants for the government failure to provide enough homes. While there may be some overlap between the issues, there's no clear evidence that migration causes a shortage of housing. There is some evidence that migration has slightly increased house prices, but it's hard to measure the exact impact and determination the direct cause. In social housing, other factors like the right to buy scheme, government policies, and the construction of new homes play a role in affecting supply and demand. Migrants already face many barriers when it comes to accessing social housing, and foreign-born nationals make up only a small percentage of social renters. The list goes on. Several domestic issues in the UK are being linked to mass immigration, and think tanks and research-based journalism would keep debunking those. This is why the crux of the issue isn't just about limiting or allowing immigration. Many political experts are calling for controlling immigration to the UK to help with mass integration. The hype around the 2024 general elections was visceral. Once again, immigration policies made the heart of many grand debates. Yet experts painfully noticed that many political actors weren't paying heed to one core issue. How closely do we mingle with each other? Integration, how those of us already here can live together well, is also important but often gets overlooked, especially when there are several narratives on how immigration as a principle is inconsistent with British values. We need to circle back. There is often a debate about identity, culture, and integration, with some people feeling that migrants are different and not like us. If these cultural arguments don't gain traction in politics, it can lead to frustration about having a voice in the conversation. Some people feel that we are not even allowed to talk about it. This complaint is often aimed at not just migrants, but also at political leaders, business figures, and media elites. These groups are accused of ignoring public opinion and pushing pro-immigration policies that align with their own interests and values. It's obvious that integration, or the lack thereof, is an existential issue for the Brits. At the heart of it, immigrants are encouraged to join the British sense of identity, but they're often sent to the margins too. Different societies have developed different ideas about citizenship and national identity. In the United States, there's a strong tradition of welcoming new arrivals and embracing the idea that they can become American. Like Australia and Canada, the US promotes a civic idea of citizenship, where a person's commitment to constitutional principles and values is what matters most. To encourage this, clear policies and rules help long-term migrants understand what's required to become citizens. However, citizenship is about more than just following rules. One way to measure how well this ideal works is by looking at social outcomes, such as whether migrants and their children have fair opportunities in education and employment. Britain performs relatively well in those areas. But there's also a less visible aspect to consider: equality of status. This is just as important in making citizenship feel real and inclusive, especially for people from different ethnic or religious backgrounds. Equality of status is based on mutual relationships, where new citizens need to feel that British identity is open to them and that people from all backgrounds are treated as full and equal members of society. When that feeling is present, new citizens can truly become British. But of course, these are theoretical grounds solely. Practically, notions can vary immensely. The other front of the same spectrum is the idea that perhaps multiculturalism has gone too far. At the height of the election frenzy in May 2024, Nigel Farage made a sound statement that resonated well with his voters. "We don't have to agree with everything," he said, referring to immigration, Islam, and multiculturalism. In 2023, Rishi Sunak called Britain a fantastic multi-ethnic democracy, and his statement was perhaps accurate. Apart from the concerning rise in anti-Semitism, racism remains largely on the fringes of politics. Britain also has a solid track record of enabling individuals from diverse ethnic backgrounds to achieve high levels of success, but there are limitations to the proposed multiculturalism, as many conservative voters. Experts cite that Farage's understanding of multiculturalism is limited. Social cohesion isn't just about broader agreement on diverse beliefs, but a more equal society. The way the Labour Party wants to tackle the issue is largely utopian. Labour is proposing a new reform to give race the same legal standing as sex in equal pay claims, aiming to address inequality. The changes would grant ethnic minorities and disabled people a full right to equal pay, aligning their legal protections with those already in place for women. This would make it easier for minority groups to file claims without having to prove direct discrimination. However, Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, argues that the change is unnecessary, stating that it's already illegal to pay someone less because of their race. She also warned that the plan could cause division, leading to a surge of cases for dodgy activist lawyers and waste millions on bureaucracy. Currently, anyone can sue for discrimination, but women have a specific right to equal pay for work of equal value under the Equality Act 2010. This allows them to make claims if they believe they are paid less than men for jobs of equal worth, even if the roles differ, such as a cashier compared to a warehouse worker. Needless to say, Conservative voters didn't receive such potential policy changes well. For them, multiculturalism is contingent upon several essential British values. An article published by David Frost in The Telegraph in May 2024 echoed the same. Frost writes, "I'm not even sure large numbers of voters want us to be a multicultural society. Everyone, I think, wants us to be a society where all opinions, beliefs and practices are tolerated within the law." In his article, he also writes about how many voters want the UK law to take precedence over any religious and cultural practices if they come into conflict. Frost's views aren't singular. Many UK voters have supported the right to toleration for minorities, but they want them to adopt mainstream British values. Such values are diverse in nature, of course, but as Frost notes, these values create a sensibilities of average UK voters. The values are seen and lived every day, for example, speaking English. The second issue in this conversation is the public policy conjecture in the country. As per Frost, public policy can and should take into account how well different communities have integrated into broader British society. Then it should work to encourage this integration. This should involve teaching a balanced and complete version of British history, including the role of Christianity, while expecting all citizens to show respect for British institutions. If a form of national service is introduced, it should be part of a wider effort to rebuild social cohesion in Britain, and it should apply to new citizens regardless of their age. To be fair, many left-leaning voters in the country would vouch for individual sovereignty and whatnot. They are already speaking against the stricter immigration policies that went into order in 2024. The strict policy on dependence has already resulted in families being separated, with some mothers and children split up due to children not receiving visas. Preventing people from bringing their dependents overlooks the fact that migrants have families and are just as valuable. In fact, having children might motivate people to move to a country like Britain, where wages are higher. But not supporting migrants in establishing roots in Britain, immigration policies continue to overlook the realities of migrant life. It is also true that UK politicians need to have serious conversations about where multiculturalism begins and where it ends. This particular aspect of the grand debate is perhaps severely needed now. With anti-immigration violence on the rise and domestic issues plaguing the country, the Labour Party has to give a safe passage to the non-natives. Talking about broader integration policies is a viable start. If you enjoyed this content, check out another one of our videos on our channel. Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.